Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Discussion Bound. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum. And I'm super excited that today we are going to be discussing the Obama portraits, edited by Richard J. Powell with contributions by four other writers. I chose today's book because obviously we're in the middle of a presidential election cycle. And unfortunately, the Tuesday that we meet in November would have been after the election, so I wanted to sort of put this particular book selection before the election. So it's a new book that was published recently, and I think was a really great way to sort of capture the present mood. Just a few notes before we get started. You probably noticed when you got connected that your microphone and video were muted by default. I do welcome you to turn on your video at any time, and in just a moment I will make it so that you can also unmute your microphone. Please choose a quiet room and close the door and silence any alerts from nearby devices. They can be very distracting when we're having a conversation. If you do choose to have on your video, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, fan, or other strong source of light or motion, as they can be very distracting. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log in using a smartphone, we do recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet so that you can see any slides, meeting tools, and each other on a larger screen. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial or first name and last name so that we know who we're talking to. In order to ask questions or make comments throughout the program, you can unmute your microphone when I ask for questions or comments. You can also type any questions or comments that you have into the chat box. A third way to participate is to raise your hand in the participant sidebar, and I'll call on you and unmute your microphone. I can say that usually these conversations move at a rapid, comfortable pace, so sometimes if you raise your hand, it can take a while for me to call on you, so please do feel free to unmute yourself and to jump in. We are recording today's program, so if you prefer not to be recorded, please make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit any questions or comments. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Nice to see so many familiar faces. Hello, everyone. So as usual, I have a couple of questions. Unfortunately, usually I have these on a handout so that you can sort of have them in front of you, but I'll just sort of go through them and that way they're in the back of your mind. I always love to start with asking what were your general reactions to the book. I'd also love to know if you learned anything interesting about the presidential and first lady portraits at the National Portrait Gallery, about the commissioning process, anything interesting about the individual portraits of President and Mrs. Obama or the artists who painted them. I also really liked reading about the connection or kinship that the Obamas felt with each of their artists and why they chose them to paint these very important commissions. These portraits, as wonderful as they are, have also been criticized for a number of reasons, including a perceived departure from tradition. Some people feel that the likenesses of President and Mrs. Obama are unrealistic. Some people feel that they should have provided a recognizable setting. And I'd like to get your reactions to those criticisms and find out whether you like the finished portraits. How do the portraits fit in with the Obama's interest in visual art and collecting? I'd love to know if anyone has seen these portraits in person, and if so, if you could describe that experience for us. There's also a lot of discussion in this book about representation and what it means for people to see themselves in the museum, a very diverse group of people. So I'd love to sort of delve into that topic as it's one that we're going to be discussing in a number of programs here at the museum this week. So I thought that we could maybe start out just with a very open discussion and description of these portraits, since they are very different from portraits that are traditional representations of the president and first lady, that we could actually look at them together and describe them so that we have a firm foundation for moving forward in this discussion. So I'd love it if anybody would just feel free to unmute yourself and talk about what we see in this portrait.
Well, I see a person, the president, sort of almost engulfed in a field of leaves and sort of flowers scattered around, sitting with his hands crossed, somewhat relaxed, but looking straight at me, almost communicating directly, it seems to me anyway. But I like the natural leaf sort of almost taking over, as you can see at the legs.
Yeah, I think that that's probably one of the most striking parts of this particular portrait is the background. As you described it, sort of he's being engulfed in a field of leaves, but there are also some pretty important flowers there. Can you all pick out some of the flowers that we see represented? I'm not a gardener, so I just say that so that you all know, but everything that I learned about the flora in this particular portrait came from this book. Go ahead, Joey.
Well, there's chrysanthemum and jasmine, and I think there was rosebuds in there. I don't know what the leaf is itself.
Yeah, everything I read didn't actually make any mention of the particular leaves that we see, but you pointed out chrysanthemums, and I believe that they're in 3 different colors. We see this sort of pink and yellow one. There's a pure yellow one, and I thought that maybe there were some red ones, but I actually don't see red ones. You also pointed out jasmine, correct? And if this is the jasmine, right? The little white ones? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What other flowers can anyone pick out?
Well, the blue lily that the book said was a symbol of an African flower, which I didn't know. So I don't know which specific blue lily it is.
So it's not a lily, but it's an African violet.
Oh, violet?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
So what the authors pointed out to us is that all of the greenery, not the greenery, but the flowers specifically in this portrait are representative of different places that are important to President Obama's life, that the African violets are indicative of his father's place of origin, which was Kenya, that the chrysanthemums are I guess official or unofficial, that wasn't clear to me because it was written about 2 ways in the book, but the flower of Chicago, and then remind me what you said this was?
Jasmine.
Jasmine is a flower from Hawaii, so. What else do we see?
I was just going to say the jasmine is very beautifully scented. And so that, again, I think brings another sort of powerful image forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So by having a very fragrant flower that's represented, and they're really beautiful. I think that my particular image here that I'm showing you isn't as crisp as I would like, but there are some really beautiful enlargements of areas of the portrait in the book, and you can see just how sort of lusciously they're painted. And so it really does engage your sense of smell as well.
I like the way he's leaning forward, and it's almost like he's listening to you or us. You know, I love that about it.
Yeah, so by him sort of facing us, looking at us, and leaning forward to us, it's a way that he is engaging with the person who's looking at the portrait, rather than, I think a lot of portraits tend to be sort of timeless, and people are looking out, you know, at something beyond the picture plane, and it's sort of like this uber representation of the person who is in the portrait, but this seems to be very engaging. Carol, how about you?
Oh, I'm not sure what the green is. It sort of thought for a minute it might be holly or ivy. I'm not sure, but I'm just wondering if metaphorically it's suggesting that he is in the thick of things. But he's not in it, but he's in the midst of it. And then of course the flowers that you've just explained, embellishing the other aspects of his life. But he's really, because the green really in those leaf things really do dominate the picture to me. I mean, and so we're entering its world rather than it being just there for some decorative touch. I get the feeling it's much more symbolic. And I confess I did not read the book for a time reason, but maybe that was explained in the book. I don't know the greenery.
It's a great read, Carol. I highly recommend that you pick up a copy.
Okay.
It's a pretty quick read as well. The essays in general, I think, are very readable, but it's also really beautifully illustrated. Barbara and then Christina.
I think, for Carol, they said that all of the flowers represented his journey. So perhaps, also the greenery, that his background is so much still a part of him. That's how I kind of felt about it. And that artist has done some very interesting artwork where he kind of ennobles people, and President Obama said, please don't put me on a horse and make me like Napoleon. And one other comment, because you said that he's leaning towards us, there was a comment in the book which I thought was very interesting. They said any place you went in the room that his feet, it always seemed that he was looking towards you. I can't wait to go see that, because it said wherever you were, his feet were. So those were just things that stood out in the book about this.
I think it was a comment that one of the security guards had made. Yeah.
Yes, I thought that was very interesting.
Christina?
I heard about eyes following you, never feet.
Never feet. Christina?
No, I thought it was interesting the way they compared this portrait to a portrait of Abraham Lincoln, who was seated similarly. And I liked, when I was reading it, I thought it, even though this gets away entirely, it's much more contemporary and different, and people might be uncomfortable with it. If you compare it to some of the more traditional portraits, there were a few large photos in the book that showed that similar, the seating position, for example, of the way his hands are and the way he's looking at you, of course, is similar to Lincoln, and Lincoln was one of his heroes. He announced that he was going to run for president at the Lincoln birthplace, and he's got a lot of connection with Lincoln. The other thing about the background that's unusual is that it comes into his person. I mean, it surrounds him. He's not just standing in front of it or next to it. It sort of embraces him. I have seen this portrait numerous times. And when you walk in, because I go to Washington all the time, and the portrait gallery, when you stand in front of this portrait, you just can't leave. You just stand there for an endless amount of time. It is so engaging. And even if you see it 20 times, you're still pulled into it.
Thank you, Christina. That's a really good point about the background. The background is not a static thing. If you just look sort of at the top, then it looks like a background, but in fact, it does interact with the sitter. So there are places then where the leaves are starting to sort of overtake the chair, but then here, if you look down around his feet, in fact, the leaves sort of come up and around his legs and his shoe. And if you look at his suit, which has a sheen, obviously, because it's reflecting back some of the green. So if you looked at his knee, his forearm, and around his lapel, you can actually see the reflection of the greenery coming through. So let's move forward and just look at Mrs. Obama's portrait and talk to me about what you're seeing here. Kent, you've got your hand up. Kent, did you have a comment?
I want to say something about. Yeah, I want to say something about what I saw in his picture. He was floating. He was coming out of a chair, and they talk about pilgrimage, and Wiley talks about launching people. He puts, black people, regular people, in these unusual, like Napoleon or whatever. And I see this as being representative of Obama is on a pilgrimage. He's continuing out. Whatever is coming up next, he's floating out that way. This is a great book. I thought, so I really enjoyed it.
Great. Others have comments about Mrs. Obama's portrait? Go ahead, Christina.
Well, obviously the thing that strikes you the most when you first stand in front of this portrait is the gray skin of Michelle Obama. And I wondered a lot about that. And I learned a lot from reading this book, that this Amy Sherrard paints grayscale skin as a response to early portrait photos. And it's a reminder of the absence of African Americans' history in large scale portraits. She does that deliberately, and it really is the thing, other than her striking dress, which is also described in detail in the book. It's her gray skin that really makes you stop and think.
Yeah, I think that the monotone skin, that grayscale skin, is something that a lot of people have either loved or hated. But as you pointed out in the book, it's something that is a trademark, not a trademark, I guess a hallmark of Amy Sherald's work. It's something that you see again and again in her work, that she has these sort of beautiful backgrounds that are built up in an amazing way so that they sort of glow. And then she has sort of beautifully colored clothes that her subjects are wearing. But her African-American subjects always have this sort of grayscale skin. And it's a reference to the fact that while there isn't really a shortage of historic photographs of African Americans, there is a shortage of representations of African Americans painted portraiture or in painting. And so it's her way to sort of refer back to art history. Does anybody want to talk about the dress a little bit? Joey, you've got your hand up. You're muted, Joey.
Sorry about that. I was
That's
just
okay.
going to say that she looks for subjects, and certainly it's illustrated here for people that represent to her that exist in the past, present, and future simultaneously. And I think that's part of the photography and grayscale aspect of this. And then she has that picture of her grandmother in the book.
Amy Sherald's grandmother.
Grandmother, right. And if you look at that picture and look at Miss Everything, they look like they're related. Those two, the little girl and the grandmother, look the same. So I think she's trying to get that aspect of past, present, and future existing simultaneously in the portrait that she's painting of Michelle.
Great observation. Christina?
Well, the dress was fascinating to read about. It's significant because of the geometric pattern, sort of is a reminder of the history of slavery, because it's similar to the favorite G-span quilters, of which there are photos in the book that show that. And she wanted very much to bring that into the portrait, the history of slavery. And so this modern dress that was designed by a designer that I'm not familiar with, but it's a lovely, very beautiful dress, but it's the design that makes us think of those quilts.
Mm-hmm. Judy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, the dress, I don't think this was mentioned in the book, but it strikes me looking at this against the blue background as a map, like a world map. And I don't want to take it too far, but you know, the wavy hair and peninsulas and oceans and I just loved the multiple associations of the dress and the pose and how she's so human and humane in this photograph and so direct and also can be more than human, if you know what I mean. I mean, can represent a world of people and the world in general of people.
Right. Kathy?
I also, well, her hand position, I think, is probably the elegance, you know, referencing some of the elegant photos from Nancy Reagan, et cetera. But the idea of a halter and is much more contemporary. And she's also well known for her arms and, you know, her bare shoulders and sort of not denying a sexual but not overtly sexual presentation of a woman. And as I said, I think the elegance of the hand reinforces back and forth the shoulder and then the presence. Also then the pietà structure, the triangular sort of stability is references historically. And I think also Faith Reingold's much more contemporary quilting as a contemporary Black artist, not just you know, the Geese band, which I agree with, but I was taken more by the patterning than I actually was by the grayness of her skin, because I am familiar with photography enough that didn't even question, I didn't question the grayness of the skin, but I thought, and also it's very flat. It doesn't have even a sense of space. I mean, she's sort of floating in space, but it does have a very flat presentation. Maybe that is the skin tones or the way in which she handles the skin, which almost acts as a barrier for you to become a part of it,
Right.
as opposed to his that you are pulled into.
So whereas his has a very, well, I mean, his space is both shallow because you feel like maybe he's sitting in front of a wall that has ivy or something. Her space, because it is this sort of plane of color, adds no three-dimensionality to it. And so it's almost as if it's pushing her forward towards you. You all have remarked about the elegance of her hands, and Joey, in the chat box, you had mentioned about his hands as well, that both of their hands in these portraits are sort of detail prominent. They play a role in the portraits. His, I just think, are so beautiful. They're so beautifully done. You know, his wedding ring is very prominent, so, you know, says something about the importance that his marriage plays, you know, in his life. And they're sort of long and elegant. I don't know, because I've never looked at his hands before, but is he a piano player? I don't know. And then definitely hers, the way that it's sort of posed under her chin, but almost elongated as well. The hands in both portraits are very elegant. And keep in mind that these two artists, Amy Sherald and Kahindi Wiley, knew nothing about what the other was painting. And Joey, you had pointed out as well that it's a cotton dress that she's wearing, a stretch cotton poplin dress. And I'll be honest with you, until I read the book and saw the photograph and that it was an actual dress, I had thought that Amy Sherald had sort of invented the dress to harken back to Pete Mondrian and the Giesben quilters. And maybe, as you said, Kathy, Faith Ringgold, but I didn't realize it was an actual dress. And yes, Judy, I agree. it looks like a dress I would love to put on. Anything else before we continue our discussion? Pat? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Pat.
I think
I would like to just say that I think both of these portraits are remarkable in the sense that they step forward with portrait art. They both speak back to historical works. In the Obama, I actually see some of the Dutch influence when the flowers would talk about and make essence, you know, of the work.
Mhm.
So I think I wouldn't want to be the portrait artist for the next portraits. I think these are going to be very hard to follow because I think in 500 years, when we look at these, they've made a transition in the portrait, you know, gallery.
Mhm.
Some of the others, the de Kooning and, you know, a few of them had, you know, branched out and had gone beyond, but these, I think, clearly speak to the painting's holistics, as opposed to just simply being a portrait, a likeness of the person. You know, much more has been given to us here.
Thanks, Pat. Taylor, you've got your hand up.
Hi, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, going off of what Pat said, it made me think about, I was wondering if the book speaks to these portraits in dialogue with maybe some previous paintings. Like when I look at Barak's painting, I think of Henri Rousseau's The Dream, and that idea of the green background and the vibrant, you know, tropical kind of idea, but also like the criticisms of Rousseau and like anti-colonialism kind of things. And so is this maybe a reinterpretation of that? And similar with Michelle's portrait, I think of like Gauguin and his work, you know, of the paintings of the Tahitian women. Is this a little bit of a dialogue with those kinds of things?
So there is a chapter in the book written by Richard Powell, who is an art historian from Duke University here in North Carolina, that sort of situates these portraits in a historical or art historical context. I would recommend going back and reading that. He goes all the way back to Dutch portraiture, as you guys talked about, and up to the present day. Also comparisons with other presidential and first lady portraits. It was really, really interesting to think about these, which to me, I guess I hadn't really thought about contextualizing them within a history of portraiture other than they were beautiful portraits that told a story and looked very different from portraits that had come before. But if you're interested in exploring that topic, Taylor, definitely check out the book. As I said, get the book. It's a beautiful book. I also love about the book that if you, hold on, let me see there. If you want Mrs. Obama on your cover, you can simply take the cover off and refold it. I don't know if anybody did this. And now she's on your cover. I don't know if anybody played with their book at all. Okay, so let me actually unshare so that we can just chat. And I'm going to bring you guys over here. All right. So talk to me about your overall impressions of the book. What did you guys think about the book? How it was put together, the different essays? Did you find them helpful, etc.?
I found them very helpful. There were different points of view, so some of the ideas were repeated, but that just helped reinforce them. But what I liked most of all was the idea of both the artists being able to use their own approach to art as well as then embedding that into the portraiture, but not diminishing the portraiture. The idea of the Blacks sort of claiming their space in the history of the art, in history of portraiture, I thought was a wonderful insight that I guess I hadn't thought about because I hadn't related to historical. I mean, I knew there weren't many Black portraitures, but that's the two artists' primary intent is to put Blacks back into their place, to an appropriate place in our history.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that the commissioning process was very interesting. There was one curator that was assigned to President Obama and helping him to identify a portraitist, and there was another curator that was assigned to Mrs. Obama to help her find a portraitist. And I believe that they said that there were 15 artists who were shortlisted, and then the Obamas interviewed each one. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons why President Obama chose Kahindi Wiley and why Mrs. Obama chose Amy Sherald. The kinship that they felt with them, or the reasons why they thought that each of those artists would be the perfect artist to paint their individual portrait.
I think when Mrs. Obama said, after a couple of sentences, she knew that she was the one.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, she didn't talk to her much. She just immediately had this connection.
Right.
I think
So
Mrs. Obama is like that. I think Michelle is like that. When you see her with kids and everybody else, she just really. Go ahead.
So Ken, I'm sorry, we have a really bad connection
Mm.
with you. So you're, maybe you can put your comments in the
Especially
chat box, and
girls.
I'll say them for you if you don't mind. It's a really bad connection. Others, what were you thinking about their affinity for their particular portrait artist? Kathy?
Well, I had written it down where she talked about, Amy talked about a pilgrimage to restore order and meaning to the Black image. And and Michelle sort of had an immediate connection to that journey. I think if you've read Becoming, she certainly has that same kind of need to sort of correct the order of Blacks in society herself. And so I think they had a symbiotic sort of journey that they're both following along.
Right. So
And
both
she felt that immediately.
So both Amy Sherald in her portraiture, as well as Kahindi Wiley, seek to elevate their African-American subjects to a place of power, a place of representation, a place of making them sort of timeless and visible. Because art history does have a real sort of vacuum of representations of African Americans. If you all are familiar with Kahindi Wiley's work, I know that there were one or two of his paintings that were in this particular book, The Obama Portraits, that he loves to pull sort of ordinary African Americans off of the street, ask him, can I paint your portrait? And then, have them go through art history books and pick a painting of a person that they like. And then he will usually paint that person in the same sort of positioning, in this sort of grand manner style, portrait, usually very large, usually either life size or larger than life size, put them in these beautiful, gilt frames, but keep them in their normal clothing, so that, he's making these statements about, the everyday African-American is, worthy of being seen and worthy of capturing the everyday existence, but in a very grand way. Whereas Amy Sherald Again, she sort of puts her usually female subject matter in front of these very neutral backgrounds and aims to make them, I can't remember exactly what she said, but sort of a timeless representation to capture the essence of someone, which I think may be that criticism of Mrs. Obama's portrait, that instead of, you know, capturing her warts and all, she's really made this beautiful sort of timeless representation of Mrs. Obama.
The Obama and the Barack and Gehindi relationship. Gehindi had an American mother and an African father,
Right.
and the father disappeared. I don't remember exactly. I think he disappeared just like Barack's father disappeared. So they had that immediate connection.
Right, right. So they both had a father who was from Africa, an American mother, and their fathers were largely not in their lives. So they definitely had that connection as well. Other connections? Go ahead, Barbara.
I was thinking that they were attracted to their paintings even before they met them. I think the personalities had a lot to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry.
Silence alerts from nearby devices, please.
Yeah, I know. I usually turn it off. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
All right, but I don't see it. Okay. I think they love their work before they met them, and then they did make a connection because they just loved the way they represented Black people in America. And that was something that they really wanted to make a statement about, which is a very important statement to have made. And I have to think that portraits may not be the same as these. These might be an exception and outstanding, just as Barack and Michelle were outstanding. I'm sure that President Trump is going to pick a much more conventional type of portraiture. I don't think he's going to. I think this is very unique to them. And that's why it's so special. And that's why it was so nice. I loved the book, and I really learned so much, you know, about the portrait gallery and all of the history. But I think they were attracted to their work as well as their personalities. The fact that they clicked was important, but I think they were attracted to their work.
Yeah, so there's I think it's in the director of the Portrait Gallery's essay where she talks about the Obama's interest in art and collecting art and expanding the White House's collection. What did you guys take away from that discussion? Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I love the fact that her name, Alma Thomas, is at the head of the table in the dining, the dining area. And again, she was the first Black woman to be a part of the abstract expressionist art collection that's there. And again, Michelle was the one who brought her into the collection. But I love the idea of it being at the head of the table. I hadn't thought about that.
So, yes, so they brought Alma Thomas into the collection and other African-American artists. And there's a beautiful picture in the book of the Obamas sort of visiting a museum during the presidency that they actually made going to the different Smithsonian museums with their girls sort of a part of their life in Washington, and that they were really interested not only in adding to the White House collection works by African-American artists and contemporary artists, but also borrowing works, which is the privilege of the president, which I learned having worked in museums, that they can sort of borrow artworks from other museums during their time in the White House to sort of customize the space to their tastes. And when I was working at the Phoenix Art Museum, there were a number of paintings that were borrowed from the Western American collection to go to the White House during George W. Bush's presidency. It's really interesting how all of that works. Let's see, another question. What do you all think about those criticisms of these portraits, that people don't like them because they are a departure from tradition, or whether or not the likenesses are realistic or unrealistic, or that people don't like them because the settings are so plain and don't sort of refer to the White House or the work that the president and first ladies were doing? Do you think that those criticisms are fair? Go ahead, Christina.
Well, I don't, because I love the portraits, and I think what they represent is that it's time that we had, that we recognize that we are a country with African Americans and that they need to be represented. And we actually had a president for 2 terms and a first lady who were outstanding. And however, I think their representation, and this was also, especially, I think Amy Sherrill said this in her book, she wanted a representation that other young women could look at, African American women, like she was herself when she was little, that it would be uplifting, it would be something that perhaps a young woman could look at it and say, well, I could aspire to that. Or, I just thought, along with, I can't imagine not having something slightly different. We had a different presidency under the Obamas. Why not have their portraits be more contemporary and be more universal in their meaning? Instead of,
That's a really interesting point, Christina, that like the Obama presidency, sort of capitalizing on the moment and youth and hope and trying to do things a different way, and the fact that they were among the youngest couple. I don't know if they were the youngest couple, but they were one of the youngest couples to inhabit the White House, that like sort of the spirit of that presidency, that these portraits sort of are different and represent that. That's a really interesting idea. What do you think about people criticizing, especially the portrait of Mrs. Obama, as not looking like her?
I think we usually see her, she's smiling and very animated, and we don't usually see her as pensive. So I think maybe people are put off by the fact that she seems more pensive rather than her usual very animated persona.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might have turned some people off, because when I think of her, I always think of her as smiling. I don't know.
When I first looked at her, it was like, it's very powerful gaze.
Mm-hmm.
Is my audio better now?
Yes, it's so much better, Kent. Thank you
I'm
for
using a different
reconnecting.
computer.
Yeah, it's
I'm
perfect.
sorry. But there's a couple of things about hers. If you look at him, he's gazing out. And as soon as I saw her, it was like, wow, it's power. She's a powerful person. And also the way she's situated, it's, the dress goes out and it's like it's on a platform. She's very solid kind of person. And the first time I looked at it, I thought of Indian in designs. And then I remembered Gee's Bin, which I've seen. And that's a great way to think about the dress. And then I don't know if anybody's mentioned it because I was out, but there's a picture of a girl situated the same way she is, young black girl, and a striped dress, just white and black stripes,
Mm-hmm.
which looked like the same positioning that she put Michelle in.
Okay. Yeah, I think that there are certain elements that Amy Sherrill brought out, and I think Kathy, you had already pointed out the sort of shoulders and the arms, which a lot of people associate with Mrs. Obama because of her fashion choices. But I think that sort of harken back to her interest in health and the elimination of childhood obesity and sort of keeping our bodies healthy and strong, that she, I think, was a common theme of conversation and activism during her presidency. I really liked, by the way, if reading the transcription of the dedication ceremony or the unveiling ceremony, I loved that. I laughed every time President Obama said anything. He's so funny. I forgot how funny he is. But Amy Sherald said, my approach to portraiture is conceptual. Once my paintings are complete, the model no longer lives in the painting as themselves. I see something bigger, more symbolic, an archetype. So I think that that's, you know, it's the approach that Amy Sherald takes to her portraiture to sort of transform her sitters into something larger than themselves, or an archetype of an idea that maybe makes it not be sort of a carbon copy of what Michelle Obama looked like at that moment, but was transforming her into, you know, a larger idea of First Lady. What about the setting? Did you guys have a problem with the setting? They're definitely different. Mrs. Obama is seated against a blue background, and of course, President Obama against that luscious flora. Do you remember when the portraits were unveiled? Were they sort of shocking to your eye initially? Go ahead, Christina.
Well, I think definitely the first time I walked into the portrait gallery, you come to the presidents first because that's the floor where all the presidents are. And then I had to ask, where is Michelle? And I had to go up a ways. And I sort of, after standing in front of Barack's for quite a while, I sort of expected, I don't know, similarly. And so when you walk in to see Michelle's, which is in a totally different part of the museum, set off by itself, you don't quite know what to make of it, because it is this, all of a sudden, this celestial, it's almost like you're up in the clouds, you're, you know, she's painted the background as nothing but celestial blue. She is grounded in that portrait, as somebody mentioned, but at the same time, she's kind of up, sort of like a Madonna in the sky or something. And it's so much more different. I mean, it's so different from the Wiley, where he's grounded in the earth and nature all around him. It takes, for me, it took a few minutes getting accustomed to it. It didn't mean I didn't like it or I was critical of it. And I'm certainly more appreciative of it. I can't wait to go back and see it yet again after having read this book, because I learned so much more about the artist and the dress and the colors of the background and the archetype idea. So anyway, yes, it's very interesting that they're totally different, but both very good in their own way. I mean, once you get used to the Michelle one and you're not looking for her familiar smiley face, it works. At least it did for me.
Thanks, Christina. Mike?
So when I looked at these portraits, I'm a very plot-oriented person. So I looked at these portraits and I thought Michelle's portrait was gorgeous, but it didn't have to be Michelle. And I think somebody said she was turned into an icon rather than an attempt to represent her. And then Obama's portrait, I felt, well, I wanted to look at him, and I found the background really distracting. And so I appreciate all the things everyone said, because I took a class this morning at Ollie about short stories, and I was totally absorbed in the plot which was uninteresting to me. And when people talked about the characters and what they represented, I really learned an awful lot. So anyway, thank you all, because I've learned a lot more about these portraits than I got from the book, although I love the book.
So Mike, your next assignment is to write a short story about each of these portraits and to come back and share.
Only if you grade it pass fail.
Well, hold on. I've got my red pen here, which the docents know all about. Yeah, I think that, Christina, you made a really interesting point about, and I remember being struck by this when I was reading the book because I hadn't thought about it this way, that President Obama's book is grounded and in earthiness, right? By that background that is just, enveloping him with the green leaves and the different flowers that are very symbolic, but that her portrait, Mrs. Obama's, has that sort of celestial blue sky background that's sort of making her iconic, right? And I think that that's really interesting because Joey, you pointed out right at the beginning of our conversation that it's almost as if Kahindi Wiley is doing everything that he can to make President Obama approachable or accessible, which was, of course, one of the important things that he tried to get across as president. So, I think that that's really interesting, again, that Kahindi Wiley and Amy Sherrill knew nothing about what the other was doing, but still took these really sort of similar approaches, although the end product was different. Let's see. So Christina, you've told us about your experience visiting these in person, and Dee, who hasn't said anything today except in the chat box, so please feel free to unmute yourself. You talked a little bit about in the chat box about your experience visiting these portraits. Do you want me to just read the chat, or do you want to unmute yourself and talk about it?
I never pass up an opportunity to talk myself.
Well, I love it when you participate. So please tell us.
Well, so my experience was almost the opposite of Christina. Was that?
Mm-hmm,
so? Because when I went, by the time I went, when you approach the gallery, what we laughed about was the first sign. We were looking for the portraits, but the first sign sent you to Michelle Obama's, and then you had to hunt for the president. Mm. So they had rearranged things or something so that where we came in, you went to Michelle Obama's first, and then you went down. Now, the day that I went, and I don't know if this is true, right to my immediate left, I'm facing Michelle Obama's portrait. To the immediate left is an amazing, very hyper realistic portrait of Toni Morrison, larger than life and larger than the image of Michelle Obama. So I'm a Morrison nut. I got drawn to that. Went back to Michelle Obama, and the first thing I noticed all the things that you all said, but the grayness of the skin, but among the people. I went with people who were Black and white. I mean, some people were white and some people were Black. Not that they were zebras, but that the most important stuff happened for us was the stuff with the little kids. There was a video that went viral of a little girl that they have a photo of her in the book, of her standing in front of Michelle Obama's portrait, just mesmerized. And when that picture went viral, the woman who made Michelle Obama's dress contacted the mother of that little girl and made her a copy of the dress. And so then there are photos of that young woman in the dress. It's an amazing, for me as an African American, a really powerful, incredible story. I have granddaughters, and she's just lost in this portrait. So the idea of what these portraits mean to people. And I also loved seeing the Barack Obama portrait, but I was stunned by how different. I went into the president gallery expecting to see only traditional sort of upright, whatever, power, intelligence, whatever, kinds of portraits. And looking at, for example, the John F. Kennedy portrait, which was done after he died, from a photograph, I understand, and at other portraits, not all of the portraits of the presidents are, quote, traditional.
Right.
There are other kinds of representation. So the Obamas does open a new chapter in lots of ways, but in some ways, they connect to the creativity of artists, visual artists in any age.
Yeah, I believe that if I don't know this for certain, but I think that this is what I read in the book, that they actually had to move the portrait of Michelle Obama out of the First Lady's exhibition because it had so much foot traffic that it wasn't in that First Lady's exhibition, there wasn't actually enough room to accommodate all the people that wanted to see it. So they moved it out to a different space, probably where you saw it, near the Toni Morrison portrait, that could accommodate the number of people, because I believe that their attendance doubled or tripled after they hung these portraits. So many people wanted to see them. Does anybody else have a personal experience of visiting these portraits that they'd like to share? Okay, then for the rest of our time, I would like to pick up on what you were saying, Dee, about your granddaughters and also about Parker Curry, this little girl who went to go see the portrait of Michelle Obama, and very famously, yes, thank you, her mom took her picture of her standing there sort of with her mouth agape, you know, staring up at the picture of Michelle Obama, and, you know, she was just permanently transformed. Her mom took this picture, posted it, it went viral, and then she was invited to, you know, all these different news programs. Very famously on Ellen DeGeneres' show, Parker Curry talks about her experience seeing the portrait, and then of course Ellen DeGeneres brought Michelle Obama onto the show to talk to Parker Curry. It's very sweet. If people have time, I can pull that up at the end. But it's this idea of representation. So not only did the Obamas very specifically want to choose African-American artists to add to the collection of the White House, to paint their own portraits for the National Portrait Gallery, but also the book talked a lot about the power of seeing yourself and the possibilities that you read from seeing yourself in a museum. And there was a quote in the book that I think, or two actually. Before America signed the Declaration of Independence and formally broke with Britain, portraiture had long been regarded as an elite art form reserved for royalty and the European aristocracy. Considered an investment in advertising, a family's influence, likenesses by fashionable artists were housed within palaces and family estates to be seen only by a privileged few. But museums are dedicated to what we as a society hold most dear. So if museums are dedicated to what we hold most dear, think about the effects of being able to see yourself, your experience, especially if it's different from mainstream America, represented in a museum, and what that would mean to you. Thoughts?
Well,
Go ahead,
wasn't
Christina.
wasn't that brought up in the book from last month?
It's brought up a lot, especially recently.
Well, I mean, when we were reading about the formation of the African American Museum.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way he described people after the museum opened, going through the museum in tears, literally sobbing, and the emotion was so great. I mean, it makes me think of that whole chapter that he writes about that. And the other thing was that I thought was interesting in this Obama portraits is they're bringing out when the director of the museum wrote her chapter in here, and she compared people coming to the museum to see those portraits as a pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
She compared it as a pilgrimage, and we think about pilgrimage as being a religious thing that, you know, people come through, but there were people from all walks of life. They had never, ever had as many visitors, never envisioned having as many people come. And when you think about that whole thought of seeing yourself, you know, seeing yourself in the museum, that was a lot of the people that were lined up waiting to get in there to see those portraits. I don't know, that's just what I thought of.
Barbara?
I had written in the chat box, and maybe for me is, you know.
Oh, sorry, I might have missed it.
It's okay, but it's all right if you missed it. But it was about the little girls who dressed up at Halloween. One of them dressed up as Amy Sherrill.
I love the glasses, wherever she found those glasses.
The little girl dressed up as the portrait. Now, that is an amazing impact on some little girls who are it's going to make a difference in their life, that was a choice, you know, that was a choice. It might have been directed by their parents, but that it was brought to the forefront to them, that I just thought that was exhilarating. It was like an exhilarating feeling that some little girls could feel empowered. And I think that, you know, anyway, sorry, that's it.
So in the dedication ceremony, Michelle Obama said, "I'm also thinking about all of the young people, particularly girls and girls of color, who in years ahead will come to this place and they will look up and they will see an image of someone who looks like them hanging on the wall of this great American institution. And I know the kind of impact that will have on their lives because I was one of those girls." And you think about, you know, by having a diverse representation in your galleries of the museum, again, the place that's dedicated to what we as a society hold most dear. By representing a diverse range of experiences, you're validating that range of experiences and the range of people that are important in this country, whether it's, you know, the people that you know about because, you know, their names are in the news or whatever, but also the people that you don't know about, because that's more of us are sort of leading everyday lives that aren't written about in the press, or that, you know, have a lot of attention sort of in the news, that, you know, then there are people that we do hear about, and that by showing a diverse representation of the country, but also a diverse range of experiences, that it helps people to see themselves and to feel like their experience means something. Dee, you said it also brought so many people to these galleries to see everything and everyone else. Yes, that there might have been people who wouldn't ordinarily come into an institution like the National Portrait Gallery, that by wanting to see these particular portraits were also exposed to different things. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was also, I think it was Kente that said it, he wanted to participate in the struggle of who gets to steer the story of man.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts, guys? I think for 2 months, I've managed to pick books that did a good job. So just to reiterate for you, Carol, the name of the book you asked, I'm sorry, it keeps doing this. If I can find the right angle. I can't. The Obama Portraits. You can find more information on our website, the Obama Portraits, with essays by Taina Carrigal, Dorothy Moss, Richard J. Powell, and Kim Saget. All of the essays, I think, are pretty easy reads, pretty digestible, maybe no more than 8-10 pages, and lots of beautiful illustrations. There were some copies at the at Malaprop's bookstore the last time I checked, and of course, if you mentioned that you were getting it for discussion bound, they give our folks, I think, a 10% discount. All right, well, thank you, everybody. This was a great discussion. I'm glad that you enjoyed the book. Next month, we are going to be reading, oh gosh, it's a long title. Judy Upjohn, do you want to give a little plug for next month? Sorry to put you on the spot. You're muted, Judy.
Yeah, I can't read the title because I don't have
I have it right in front of you. I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm getting there.
You
Okay.
must change your life.
Thank you. You Must Change Your Life, the story of Rainer Maria Rilke and Auguste Rodin by Rachel Corbett. And that meeting will be November 10th at 12 p.m. and moderated by Judy Upjohn, one of our touring docents here at the museum, who specifically requested that we read and discuss that book. So of course I said, well, Judy, if you want us to read it, you've got to lead the discussion. And she said yes. So please do pick up a copy at Malaprop's or your favorite independent bookseller. And we will look forward to seeing you again next month. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Christy.
Bye.
Thank you.